Summary of Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy. CB Publishers. Book plot. First-person narration is used to tell the story from the viewpoint of Inti Flynn, a biologist who works for a global organization that rewilds wolves in the Scottish Highlands. The inhabitants of Scotland are opposed to the Wolf Project because they worry that the wolves will attack and eat their people and animals. Aggie, Inti's twin sister, suffers severe PTSD as a result of a terrible rape and needs regular care. Therefore, Inti brought Aggie with her to Scotland. Mirror touch synesthesia is a neurological disease that affects Inti. She picks up on the sensory impressions of everyone nearby, including occasionally the animals. They explain to Inti and her group during a town meeting why their forefathers rid the region of wolves. After the meeting, Red McCray, a local, approaches Inti and threatens her. Stuart Burns sells his lame horse to Inti. Inti notices Lainey, Stuart's wife, is terrified of him. Inti discovers Lainey is in the hospital the following day. She says that while riding a horse she fell. Inti confronts Stuart in front of everyone and claims that he beat his wife. Stuart approaches her, but when Duncan shows up, he persuades Inti to wait for him in the bar. He has obvious wounds when he joins her. He admits that Stuart is an abuser, but they are unable to stop him. When Inti and Duncan become closer, she is unsure if she can trust him. When Inti leaves Duncan's house one night at dawn, she discovers Stuart's body lying in the snow. Inti is concerned that a wolf is to blame for the man's disembowelment. Even if Stuart has been killed, she is aware that the wolves will still be blamed and killed by the locals. Inti, a skilled tracker, hides Stuart's body in the woods, believing it won't be discovered. Inti learns she is pregnant shortly after that. Duncan has stated that he does not want children, so she does not inform him. As a result of Stuart being reported missing, Duncan, the police chief, questions Inti about their most recent interaction. Inti receives a sign from Aggie at home indicating that she is pregnant. She concurs that Inti should keep Duncan in the dark. Inti later discovers injured dogs Fingal and Duncan lying in the snow. They have had their throats cut, and they are barely alive. Duncan is dragged behind Inti to her car, where she puts him in the back seat and heads to the hospital. Inti believes that a wolf by the name of Ten committed the assault. Following her hunt and the killing of Ten, she experiences labor pains and gives birth to her daughter in the woods. They almost perish from exposure, but Aggie discovers her the next morning. Aggie promises she will return for Inti, who is bleeding out after she has taken the baby. Red McCray locates Inti and transports her to safety before Aggie can make her way back. Aggie confesses to killing Stuart and assaulting Duncan while she is in the hospital. Duncan falsely claims that he was attacked by a wolf after he had recovered. Together, Duncan and Inti raise their daughter in their home. Aggie is unable to join Inti in her new life and vanishes into the woods. Inti is certain she will never be seen again. Chapter 1. The first chapter begins with Inti's father showing his young children how to skin a rabbit in a shed in the forest. She discovers for the first time that she has mirror touch synesthesia at this point. She feels as though she were experiencing it herself when her father slices the rabbit open. The incident is notable because she spots her first wolf in the distance as she exits the shed. Inti is currently in the Scottish Highlands keeping an eye on the wolves that her crew and she are ready to release into the forest. The 14 tranquilized wolves are transferred from their enclosures into pens, which they will then relocate to 3 different locations in the forest. About 5 wolves intended to form separate packs are housed in each kennel. The wolves are native to British Columbia, like Inti, and she wonders if they will survive in an unfamiliar setting. Chapter 2. Aggie is bathed, dressed, and given a status report on the wolves by Inti. The female number 6 and the male number 9, who are expected to mate and create a pack, are of great importance to Inti. Aggie and Inti speak frequently, although Aggie is frequently non-responsive. On her way to work, Inti is cut off by a black horse. It is being followed by a man in a truck through a snowy field. Inti pursues him. They all notice the horse has crossed an icy river that is going to shatter. Inti wades onto the ice, ropes the horse, and rides it to safety because the limping man is unable to recover the animal. Its wounded leg raises the possibility that its owner will shoot it. The horse is given to the man, who is not its owner, and Inti warns him not to drive on any protected land. Inti decides she does not like him as he criticizes her plan to rewild the wolves. Chapter 3. Inti recalls the summers she and Aggie spent in British Columbia with their father. Both she and Aggie felt comfortable there. Their father, an environmentalist, instilled in them a respect for and knowledge of nature. He was a logger in the past but changed his mind after learning that. Understood that trees are more valuable alive than timber after coming upon a large Douglas fir. He has devoted his life to preserving the forest ever since. The girl's mother was a detective, and they raised them for the majority of their childhood in Sydney, Australia. She never explains to the children how she met their father or the reasons they split up. While their father places a strong emphasis on preserving the environment, their mother emphasizes the hard facts of life. She cautions Inti that being overly concerned will make her susceptible. Inti and her group go to a town meeting in Scotland to talk about the rewilding initiative. The majority of residents complain that the wolves will injure their children and eat their livestock. With the absence of the area's natural predator, the ecosystem has become unbalanced, and the woodlands are perishing as a result, according to Inti's Scottish co-worker Evan. The farmers object that the wolves' protection is being prioritized because they think it would lead to the extinction of their way of life. Following the meeting, an intimidating guy named Red approaches Inti and threatens to murder all of his sheep if a wolf attacks one of them. Inti warns him that doing so would land him in jail because they are a protected species. When Inti runs across Duncan McTavish, who she first met that morning, he informs her that the horse's owners intend to put it to death. When they get there, Inti tells the owner that she would purchase the horse after asking him to drive her there. She agrees despite the outrageous sum he demands. The horse escaped because his wife Lainey left the gate open. Lainey's fear of her spouse can be discerned by Inti. When Inti comes back the following morning to make the initial payment and pick up the horse, she finds out that Lainey is in the hospital. Chapter 4. Inti begins the story by telling how their mother took the girls to court appearances where husbands had harmed their spouses. Inti refuses to accept that people are bad, even though she is aware that her mother is trying to teach them a lesson by exposing them to the worst aspects of humans. If she is careless, a man will mistreat her and her children warn her mother. Lainey is visited by Inti at the hospital. Lainey rejects her attempts to persuade her to acknowledge that her husband Stuart is abusing her. Lainey breaks horses for a living, thus the claim that she was thrown off a horse is reasonable, Duncan informs Inti. Duncan is aware that Lainey will not confess, thus they can do nothing to Stuart until she does. Chapter 5. Aggie can shoot the animals, while Inti is a better tracker. Her father informs Inti that she has seen her first wolf paw print, which is unusual. She then decides to research wolves' enigmatic characteristics. Inti describes how after Aggie was expelled from Sydney's high school, the sisters were taken to live with their father in the jungle. Because he was harassing Inti, she used a book by Shakespeare to break the boy's nose. When they moved to British Columbia when they were about 17 years old, they became aware that their father's mental state had gotten worse. As his kitchen was empty, Aggie brought him food from the grocery store, but he refused to eat it and insisted that the girls learn to hunt and track instead. Chapters 1 to 5 Analysis. The three main locales of the story, Scotland, British Columbia, and Australia, are introduced in the first 5 chapters. The story switches back and forth between various places and eras, with Scotland standing in for the present, and British Columbia, Australia, and eventually Alaska in the past. The story interweaves the themes and occasions that shape Inti's life via flashbacks, and each chapter comprises sections that are told in both the present and past tense. These serve as contrasts to the events currently occurring and provide context for Inti's mental state, which is essential to comprehend how her character develops. Inti and her twin sister Aggie are the major relationships that are developed in these chapters. The reader can learn more about Aggie's past before the incidents that made her traumatized by reading the chapters that describe their early life. The premise of the novel that things that appear to be in opposition to one another, cruelty and kindness, civilization and wilderness, are paradoxically vital to one another is furthered by the duality of the twins, who are both doubles and opposites of one another. The children's father, who devotes his life to surviving off the land, introduces the overarching themes of conservation and climate change. He is also a paradox. He was a logger who became a naturalist. His discourse occasionally seems like exposition, which the author uses to give definitions and background information regarding climate change without using didactic narration. The author may want readers to pay attention to the call to action that is made by him. The character, however, is more than just a mouthpiece, because when the girls go back, they discover that his mental state has gotten worse, which foreshadows Inti and Aggie's troubles as the story progresses. Chapter 6. The wolves' first steps into the wild are described by Inti. Knowing that it will take the wolves days or possibly weeks to explore the unknown, her crew opens their pens. Even though the rest of her Glenshee pack does not follow, female number 10 immediately departs. Red McCray meets Inti's group outside the pub and informs them that their antics would disturb the neighborhood. Inti challenges Stuart, who is beside him, to reveal that he beats his wife. Almost breaking out into a fight, Duncan steps in and diffuses the situation. Later, he warns Inti not to approach Stuart, but Inti feels that Stuart should learn to control his wrath, instead of expecting everyone to avoid provoking him. Inti acknowledges her attraction to Duncan, and the two of them spend the night together. Inti worries that she would develop an excessive amount of attachment to him in the morning, something she has avoided doing with anyone since her sister was admitted to the hospital. Chapter 7. Inti notices that Aggie allowed the fire to burn out as she gets back to her cabin. Aggie's PTSD prevents her from leaving the house, and Inti recalls that the woodpile is outdoors. Inti makes a self-promise to stay away from Duncan after feeling bad about spending the night with him. Inti flies over the forest that day to follow the wolves using their GPS collars. As she sees guy number 9, she is concerned about his proximity to the fields at the forest's edge. Inti is unable to find 9's frequency a week later. When Duncan phones Inti, she finds out that her suspicions about 9 being shot are confirmed. They visit Red's farm, where he says he initially believed it to be a wild dog. To conduct an autopsy, Inti transports the body to Amelia's veterinarian clinic. One evening, number 6 starts to wail in search of her missing partner. Chapter 8. Inti makes an effort to locate number 6 and check on her well-being, because she is carrying a litter. Even though Inti wants to charge Red with murdering 9, they are unable to refute his assertion. Duncan thinks that by charging him so soon after the wolves were let loose, the public will get uneasy. To find 6, he drives Inti into the jungle. Evan noticed the wolf in a ravine, so Inti descends there and shoots it with a tranquilizer dart to bring it securely to their lab. 6 has given birth to 6 pups, which they learn when they relocate her. The girl's final year with their father is briefly recalled. They transported him across the country from British Columbia to the United States while he battled dementia. They believed that being surrounded by the magnificent woodlands would aid in his memory recovery. He did for a moment, but after that things just got worse. Chapter 9. Inti is still owed money for the horse, so Stuart shows up at her cottage and demands the balance. He promises to show up each evening until she pays. As Inti arrives at Duncan's home, they reminisce about their former lovers as they lie in bed. Inti considers how her desire to have children has diminished since her sister's rape, and how Duncan stated that he does not want children. Their father's story, whose mental state has nearly completely deteriorated, is covered in the narrative. Never Inti, he starts hitting Aggie hard before mounting his favorite horse and vanishing into the woods. He is never seen by the girls again. Chapter 10. At the pharmacy, Inti bumps into Lainey, and they strike up a relatively cordial conversation. Despite his friendly demeanor, Stuart sets the aspirin Lainey is holding back on the shelf when he arrives. Despite her best efforts, her bruises are still evident despite her makeup. Stuart receives a call from Inti outside, asking if he enjoys frightening ladies. Every evening, he has been parked in front of her cottage. She admits that she finds him to be pitiful, and tells him so. To expose his character, she is provoking him to attack her. When Duncan comes, the argument is stopped. Inti is instructed to wait for him in the tavern next door. He has facial wounds when Duncan gets there. Inti is aware of their conflict with Stuart. Inti and Duncan fight over how dangerous it is for men to beat women. Duncan acknowledges that Stuart is terrifying everyone, and Inti makes the implication that she will deal with Stuart if no one else will. They visit Duncan's home that evening. Duncan has left when Inti awakens in the middle of the night. Chapter 11. Inti goes outside at 3 in the morning to look for Duncan. She comes across Stuart's body in the woods. His insides had been torn out. She chooses to bury his body to prevent her wolves from coming under suspicion. Chapters 6 to 11 Analysis. The primary conflicts are further developed in these chapters in both Inti's personal and external narratives. She begins to question her capacity to insulate herself from others as she becomes closer to Duncan. Inti thought her mother was right when her sister was raped. People are wicked, and having sympathy for them will only lead to trouble. Inti feels that developing other relationships, particularly with a guy, will be a betrayal because she has committed her life to caring for her sister. These chapters highlight a significant aspect of Duncan's personality. Even though the story is filled with instances of males abusing women and domestic violence, Duncan is a protector who sticks up for Inti at the price of his reputation and well-being. Despite his desire to defend Inti, the village's chief of police must appease Stuart to maintain peace. This, in Inti's opinion, is merely an excuse because everyone is afraid to enrage Stuart. He cautions Inti against criticizing abusive males since doing so normalizes their behavior. He claims that the victims are ladies who are frantically trying to survive a man they previously loved. They are just males, he claims. Inti is taken aback by his insights and feels that she has misjudged him. Inti is in a pickle because of Stuart's passing. She was unconsciously confronting Aggie's ex-husband when she confronted Stuart. She told Duncan that she was going to murder Stuart in her dreams. Part of her wonders that Duncan might be the culprit when she discovers him absent that night. The alternative and perhaps worse scenario is that he was attacked by a wolf. Stuart's demise might have been caused by one of Inti's two loves. She worries that her bonds are to blame for suffering once more.